Hello everyone, welcome to the 140 Q&A practice. I'm going to give you a short word list so you can write out some of these words before we start. You're going to hear semantics, clarification, disposal, Willow Lane, Martin Cohen, Cordova, narcotics, penitentiary, vicinity, ambiguous, drug dealer, nefarious, which means evil or bad, transactions. Okay, this is going to start off with plaintiff attorney. You're also going to hear investigation, and the brief for that is VEGS. And officer is on here. I write officer, initial S, final effer, but you may have a different way to write it. That's that way I write it. All right, here we go. Ready? Now, Officer Neumayer, you were in possession of information from which you concluded that Mr. Stevenson had information that would be of value to you in some investigation. Well, I will object as being ambiguous, Your Honor. May we have the question, Miss Reporter? Do you follow that question? I would have to answer that yes. As the question was stated, I would say yes. Thank you. Now, what was the case that you were investigating that supplied that information? I was interested in finding out where a party by the name of Cordova was living. I had information that Mr. Cordova was living on Willow Lane within the general vicinity of this particular property, 2204 Willow Lane, Memphis, Tennessee. Did you have any information that indicated to you that Mr. Cordova knew Mr. Stevenson or Mr. Stevenson knew Mr. Cordova? Not specifically, no, sir. Did you have any information that Mr. Cordova was living at or might be living on Willow Lane? As I previously stated, the information I had at my disposal at that time was that Mr. Cordova was living somewhere on Willow Lane in that general vicinity, and knowing the vicinity, there were only about 3 places that had actual residences on them, and this 2204 was one of the residences that was occupied by Mr. Stevenson. All right, at that time then, you knew that 2204 Willow Lane was occupied by Mr. Stevenson? To the best of my knowledge, it was occupied by Mr. Stevenson. All right, and what was the source of your information regarding Mr. Cordova? Deputy Martin Cohen of the Tennessee Criminal Investigation Bureau. Was that the only source of information that you had regarding this Mr. Cordova? No. All right. What was the other source or sources? General street conversation with individuals that I have arrested, people that I talked to. I had arrested Cordova in the past. He was a large supplier of dangerous drugs, narcotics, in the Memphis area. He had done time in the state penitentiary, and he was involved in a lot of nefarious activities in our community. No one in particular, nothing specific, other than the information from Deputy Cohen and what I had stored from my vast resources in talking to people. All right, now in connection with your previous arrests of Mr. Cordova, had he ever indicated that he, at any time, had lived or had business transactions at 2204 Willow Lane? Objection immaterial. Quite material, goes to the issue of this officer's knowledge, the facts that he possessed at the time that he went there, and whether or not those facts reasonably justified his going to that location at all. We will hear from you. I didn't hear you. We will hear from you. Well, Your Honor, he said that he had information from Deputy Cohen. What he found out from Mr. Cordova during past arrests is immaterial. The question is what he had in his possession on the date he went to 2204 Willow Lane concerning Mr. Cordova. If I may add, he indicated he received information in addition to that which he had from Officer Cohen through several other sources, one of which was his previous arrests of Cordova, and secondly, through conversations that he had with other people that he had arrested, and information regarding Cordova's activities as a large drug dealer. Overruled, you may answer. Read the question, Miss Reporter. Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor. No. All right. Was 2204 Willow Lane an address that was in any way connected with large-scale drug activities in this area in your personal experience? It would be a matter of semantics with you and me, sir. I don't know what you mean by large scale. Large scale, for the purpose of clarification, would be used in reference to the question in the same context that you used it in regard to Mr. Cordova's activities in this, yes, sir, area. Yes, sir. And the answer is yes, 2204. Yes, sir. 2204 Willow Lane has been brought to my attention as possibly a large-scale traffic spot for drugs in that area. Now, had you made any arrests for drugs at 2204 Willow Lane prior to the time that you went there? No, sir, I had not. Do you know anyone else, fellow officers, that had made such arrests at that address? No, sir, I do not. Then would it be fair to say that your opinion that this 2204 Willow Lane was connected with large-scale drug transactions would be true if Cordova, the man you were looking for, had been there or had activities there? No, sir. Okay, I'm going to switch transcripts. And you're going to hear Grapevine Restaurant. The brief for that is S-T-R-A-U-N-T, Straunt. Attorney, T-O-R-N. Torn is a long O. Escrow is S-K-R long O, Scrow. You're going to hear Real Estate and Neighbor. Neighbor is N long A-B, Nabe. Okay, this is defense questioning. Approximately how long did the conversation last that occurred where you were discussing maybe renting his property? I would say about 5 minutes or so. It was just in the driveway and out. That's all there was to it. Did you hear by way of the grapevine that his property might be for sale or lease? Yes, you can ask any of the neighbors right on down the street about the place. Well, is there any sort of a sign up that says it is for rent or anything like that? No. Did a particular person say Mr. Gardner was interested in renting his property or selling it or something? No. You hear of a place for rent, and everybody goes and looks at it, you know, to see if it's something better than they have now. I am just trying to figure out from whom you heard it. Oh, I don't know. Did you meet somebody in a restaurant, or did a real estate broker tell you, or did you see it online? No, it wasn't a real estate broker. There was no sign on the property? No. Did a real estate broker help you in finding the place that you have now? No, sir, I found my own. Did you handle your own escrow for that place? Sure did. You say you did handle your own escrow? Yes, I did. That's interesting because you don't go through escrow if you are simply renting. Okay, I'm going to switch transcripts again. Do a little bit of medical. All right, here we go. Doctor, I wonder if you could tell us what significance, if any, In your examination of Mr. Johnson, you placed upon these statements allegedly made by Mr. Johnson, such as the ones I repeated to you. I'm sorry I shot the officers out there. I just shot. It doesn't mean anything to me anyway. This was made shortly after he was taken into custody, I assumed. I examined him about that several times specifically, and he didn't recall making those statements, information indicating that at that time he was episodically in and out of an amnesia state where he was moved from one room to another without remembering it and not recalling part of his x-rays, and he didn't have any recall of that. Doctor, you practice over at the Orange County Medical Center, is that right? Yes. Are you at all familiar with the emergency room procedures? To some extent, yes. Do you have any knowledge whether it's customary to leave a patient in the emergency room unattended by a medical personnel when that patient has been wounded? I don't believe it's customary. Would it be customary at the Orange County Medical Center to always have a medical person in attendance with someone suffering from shock and who has been shot? Yes, they keep them under pretty close observation, I believe. Doctor, I hate to be redundant, and I hope I'm not, but back to these alleged statements made by Mr. Johnson over at the Orange County Medical Center. Do you recall reading these police reports where these statements were contained? Yes. Did you place any significance in those statements, or do you place a significance in those statements that your opinion as to Mr. Johnson's state of mind, to wit, whether or not he could distinguish between right and wrong, and knew the nature and quality of his acts on this night? Do these statements change your opinion in any way whatsoever? No, I don't believe so. Doctor, I wonder, did you form any opinion as to when Mr. Johnson first went into this acute alcoholic hallucinosis state and when he came out of it? No, I wasn't really able to get the time differential there. He probably went into it when he was still drinking in the bar, when he first saw this image up over the bar. And he can describe this very vividly and was still in it while he went home. That's one of the things that is different in this type of a psychotic episode than others. There is still some ability to comprehend what is happening and react. For instance, he was able to run home and find his house. In other words, they aren't completely out of contact with their surroundings. He was still responding to the hallucinations, and he probably remained in that state with some variation in the degree of it. There are sometimes brief, lucid intervals. He recalls the ride to the hospital, and he was probably more in contact then, and he probably lost contact again after being there. That's characteristic of this. Often it comes and goes until they finally sleep, and then they wake up, and the next day are usually fairly clear, but this type of episode is usually terminated by sleep. Okay, and that concludes our 140 Q&A practice. Have a great day.